Father expelled his wife and daughter from home and divorced them and forced me to leave my house for the sake of the family. My neglectful father and manipulative stepmother are trying to force me out of my own home to accommodate my entitled pregnant stepsister because her boyfriend abandoned her and she's now struggling. I'm a 37-year-old man with a stingy, self-absorbed, and frequently absent dad who is 65. He recently discovered my income, and to my astonishment, he decided I should vacate my house under the guise of family obligations. Emily, my 27-year-old stepsister and daddy's little princess, has somehow ended up pregnant. With her ambitious career as an escort and OnlyFans model, she's having a hard time finding a place to live since her boyfriend left. My dad believes he can fix everything, and apparently, I'm the solution. I have to relinquish my home and my hard-earned money to this woman because she made poor life choices. I'm the son my dad has repeatedly refused to acknowledge as his responsibility, but since he learned about my new home, job, and surprisingly high income, he's become very insistent about our blood connection. While I'm not thrilled about his constant reminders of our relationship, he's also trying to make me bond with his wife and her daughter. Granted, she's also his kid, but I was pushed away too early to develop any connection with her. Looking back, I'm glad I didn't because I'd be even more disappointed. Before you all jump in, I just want to make it clear that I'm here to vent my feelings. I have opinions, thoughts, and emotions to share. They might not align with yours, and you may disagree, but I need to get them out because, honestly, I don't have anyone else to talk to. Now let's talk about Emily, short for Amelia, who's my half-sister. She's about 10 years younger than me and somehow makes our dad proud, literally. Dad's delusional because this woman's doing nothing but working as an escort and running a failed OnlyFans account, yet he calls her his pride. Yeah, you read that correctly. I'm guessing he doesn't know the full story. Who's going to tell him? I'm not particularly conservative, but I try to uphold my morals and focus on my career. I date women when I have time to get to know them better. Sometimes there's chemistry, but other factors like long distance and timing issues come into play. Other times, there's just no connection. I avoid random hookups. I prefer to wait for the right person. Having a high body count grosses me out. I don't understand why some men boast about it. It's repulsive. Anyway, that's how I live my life. Unfortunately, my stepsister has a different perspective. She has likely lost track of her sexual partners. Not only is she an escort, which I find revolting, but it's also incredibly dangerous. Some clients do disturbing things to escorts. I can't comprehend why anyone would think it's acceptable to work in such a risky field. Additionally, she uploads explicit videos and photos of herself online to make money, but she doesn't find much success there either. She probably doesn't understand how to attract traffic, but for whatever reason, it's a flop. How do I know about this? Here's an embarrassing story. My friend told me about it. He mentioned that Emily texted him after they met for a drink and asked if he wanted to hook up. Hearing this, I was already annoyed because the guy had gone out with my sister, but he claimed he didn't know she was my sister at the time. I'm not sure if he's being truthful, but he said she sent him the link to her page and showed it to me. She's always broke and asking our dad for money, so it's clear her ventures aren't working out. Despite all this, my dad and stepmother still expect me to sacrifice my stability for her mistakes. It's infuriating and unjust, and I don't see why I should suffer for her poor decisions. Things weren't going too well for her. I couldn't bring myself to ask her about it directly, and I never told Dad either. Another time I saw her taking a call, and then sitting in a car with an older man. He gave her flowers and they drove off. She would sneak back into the house through the window at odd hours. I noticed this when I used to come home from college for the holidays. I don't know if she's still at it, but I don't want to be a part of any of it. I have a respected position where I work, and I'm happy about it. Finally, I haven't lived much with my new family since my dad was keen on sending me away at every opportunity. But I've seen Emily enough to say that she takes after her mother, Karen, who is 61. Karen believed she was quite the icon in her prime. She used to be a flight attendant and was fairly attractive to womanizing men like my dad. Now she's a typical botched-face Karen, if you know what I mean. With her claw-like hands and nails longer than her lipstick, she manages the neighborhood daycare. It's weird how parents would leave their kids with Edward Scissorhands like that she may poke out a child's eye with those long nails. Anyway, she's just as prickly as her nails. She has an opinion about everything and loves to cause problems in other people's lives. She has a terrible voice and has more plastic in her body than the ocean. She's as genuine as fake leather. She influences Dad for the worse. I believe she was a major reason why my dad didn't think twice before sending me to boarding school when I was 10, because she didn't want to raise a kid that wasn't her own. Now let me tell you about my dad. He's kind of the main problem in all this. He thinks whatever he does in life is justified, even when it's far from it, because he's lived a whole life, so he knows better. He says he regrets having me because I'm nothing like him. Thank God I'm not. My mom was a strong woman. She knew her priorities well and took good care of my dad, but they fell out. She used to tell me that Dad wasn't a bad person, just a different person, and no matter what happens, he's always going to be my dad, and I should never forget that. But she was a good soul. She didn't want to poison my thoughts against my father. I'm sure he was as unbearable to her as he is today. They separated and divorced a few months later. I was 6 years old at the time, and then 3 months after the divorce, my dad married Karen. They had Emily when I turned 8, and then my mom died in a car crash. I can't forget it because she was on her way to pick me up from school. She had always been on time, but just once she was 15 minutes late. To me, it seemed like an hour, but it was 15 minutes. She got hit at an intersection by a drunk driver. He survived, but she did not. He got a DUI in a few years, and I was left alone forever. I waited in school, and it took them 3 hours to come and get me. I was lied to and confused since my dad had come. I'll never forget his annoyance when he looked over at Karen and asked what they should do about me, and she said, "Your kid. Your problem." "Precisely, Dad. Now you can't come and tell me I'll have to take care of your spoiled kid. I have a stable job now and manage a few small businesses on the side. I've worked really hard since I turned 17 and have been earning since. After boarding school, I went to college and only visited during the holidays, so I've been on my own since 10. I've put in a lot of effort to get where I am and recently bought a house. It's a nice little place, much better than the shared apartment I had with my friends. It was a life goal I finally achieved. Thought I'd never achieve. The thing is, I only just moved in last month. I may not like my family much, but basic decency required me to involve them in such a significant moment. So, I invited them to the housewarming too. My dad's reaction was pretty sad to watch. He looked envious, to be honest, and a little annoyed as he asked about the furniture, the architect, and the interior designer. I told him what I thought was good enough information, and he responded with taunts like, "I wouldn't know, you never bothered telling me," trying to gain attention and making our weak relationship obvious in front of friends and work colleagues, even my boss. A week passed, and I got a call from him while I was at work, managing a complex project. He said he wanted to meet since it was urgent, and I agreed. I went home and saw a very angry Karen and swollen red-eyed Emily giving me the side eye from the living room. Dad was in the kitchen, taking bottles of beer from the fridge. He offered me one, and I politely declined, worried about what he'd say. I asked him what he wanted me for, and he raised his brows and responded with another question, asking me if I'd finally started giving a damn about us. I frowned in confusion because I didn't understand what he was getting at. He asked me to join Emily and Karen in the living room. I nodded and went over to a couch across from the two and sat down. Emily folded her arms and Karen rolled her eyes. Dad walked in and sat with them facing me. He put his beer bottle on the coffee table and leaned back. He then asked me if I was blind. There was a pause, confusion on my end, and anger on theirs, probably. Before I could respond, he added that it's either I'm blind or I choose not to see things that need to be seen. He said I had probably gotten very proud ever since I got a house and refused to look at the people who actually mean something to me. I sighed and asked him what he meant by all of that and requested that he'd be more clear. He blew sarcastically and then told me I was unbothered by the serious situation in the room. He said that I chose not to see that the family was in jeopardy, and I had decided not to offer to or be of any sort of help. Obviously, I asked him what jeopardy he was referring to. He looked over at Emily, who rolled her eyes and announced that she's pregnant. Like any normal person, I wanted to congratulate her, but before I could, she started crying. Karen hugged her and told me I should know what's going on at home, that I should care enough to ask. Dad said Emily had just found out she's pregnant, and the boy responsible has now broken up with her because of it. Karen added that Emily has decided to keep the baby, and that is what we should base further decisions on. All I could manage to say was, "Can she afford it?" I got death stares from both Emily and Karen, and honestly, I meant well. It was my concern. In my head, I had already assumed that maybe they wanted me to chip in with money to help her out, and I was genuinely ready to do that. But then Dad stood and walked over to my side and sat down with me. He then said that that was why he called me. He said that he's a good father to his girl, and maybe my mother didn't teach me how to be a good brother, but brothers would give their life away for the comfort of their sisters. I beg your effing pardon? I know my financial input is needed, but I'm not dying for her. I sighed and asked what he wanted me to do about it. He smiled and patted my back and said, "That's my good boy." I gave a fake smile, which faded the moment Dad spoke his next few words. "You're giving your house to Emily." "No, I'm not." "Yes," he said immediately. Dad frowned. He asked me why not, so I told him that I could help out financially, but giving up my house was out of the question. "With some cash, but the house is mine. I can lend her a room without rent until she can manage to pay for it," I said. Dad stood from his seat and shouted, "Nonsense!" "It makes perfect sense to me, Dad," I replied, but he insisted I not only give her the house but also move out and buy another for myself. I argued that Emily couldn't even afford to pay the bills and manage the house if she's having a baby and unemployed, and Dad told me that those would also be my responsibilities. "Excuse me?" "Hell no," I said, furious but trying to remain respectful. I got to my feet and told him that was not possible and that I would now be leaving. Then I left. He didn't stop there. He showed up at my house a week later while I was at work. I don't know how he got inside or where he got the keys from, but when I came home, I saw men moving boxes outside the house, boxes full of my stuff. I hurried inside, asking them what they were doing, and they told me the house owner had ordered them to throw that stuff out. I shouted that I was the owner of the house and that they should get my stuff back inside and leave immediately. I lost my cool. This was the last thing I'd expected to witness coming home. I went inside to find Dad and Emily, and they still stood there demanding I do what brothers should do. I told them to leave, but they didn't listen, so I told them I'd call the cops on them. That's when they finally left, bad-mouthing me and using curses. Now, I know this is a lot to read, but it was so much worse in person. A week has passed, and I kind of feel bad about it, which is why I'm posting here. Was I wrong? I feel like they need me, and I shouldn't cut them off like this, but I also feel like there are limits to what I'm okay doing for them. It angers me how disconnected and unbothered they were about me as I grew up. But now they expect me to lay my life for them. It's a bit much, don't you think? Let me know. I can't even involve my friends in this. You all are all I have right now. Update. Hey everyone, I hope you all are well. It's been a week since I posted, and honestly, I didn't expect it to get the attention it did. I read the comments as they came, and some made me question a lot of things. Soon enough, I decided not to cut my family off entirely. This was because I received a call from Emily. She told me she wanted to meet me, and I accepted. She asked to meet at my house since she wanted to tell me a few things, but I was still recovering from the scene made last time, so I insisted we meet somewhere else. We went to a coffee shop, and she was pretty uneasy at the start. Normally, she's pretty arrogant and rude, but she seemed quite unlike herself. We sat in the corner, and she told me she'd recently been broken up with. I responded, saying I had an idea since Dad said that the guy who got her pregnant had left her. She shook her head and said that that's what Dad thinks. I asked her what it really was, and she told me that Dad thinks her boyfriend left her because he has commitment issues. But in reality, she's the one with the commitment issues. Shocking, right? She said that she really cared for this guy, but he'd found out about a few things in regards to her just a few days before she broke the pregnancy news to him. When they met, he wanted to confront her about those things, but she spoke first, and that enraged him further. He got pretty crazy in that moment and put a hole in the wall. She said he scared her. Then he told her he was breaking up with her and left without hearing her response. She's been trying to call him constantly, and he doesn't respond at all. He's only texted her back once, saying that she needs to move on. Hearing all this, I felt a mix of emotions. I still don't agree with how my family treated me, but I realized Emily was in a tough spot too. I decided to help her out financially, but made it clear that giving up my house was not an option. We ended the conversation on a better note, and she promised to be more responsible moving forward. Get rid of the kid first and let him know. Only then will he speak to her at all, but she has to get rid of the kid to get that chance. Now, I know Emily isn't a saint, but this guy, I don't like him at all. I only asked her what those things were that he'd found out, and she said it would be weird to tell a brother about it. I kind of understood that she was probably referring to the OnlyFans and escorting, so I shrugged and said it was okay if she didn't want to tell me. Before I could ask her what she'd wanted to meet me for, she drew in a deep breath and let it out. Then she told me that she'd been involved in shady things. I was worried as I didn't really want to hear confirmation of all my suspicions, but I did. She told me that she'd wanted to paint and become an artist, but Karen told her that it wouldn't fetch her a good life or money. Emily was told that she needed to find herself a man as soon as possible. Soon enough, she started gaining the attention of older men, which kind of grossed her out at first. When she told Karen about it, Karen said that was a good thing. It was indeed the older men who knew what to do with the money they had and who were making any money at all. Emily was only 19 at the time, and Karen told her college wouldn't or couldn't fetch her a good, comfortable life. Emily had youth, and there were many who would pay for that. Emily decided she wanted to become a model. She tried and went to many modeling agencies, but none seemed interested in her. Then she met a guy in his 40s who told her he could get her a gig. He took her to parties and bought her expensive clothes and jewelry for the events, and she was happy until she was told about her first gig. It turns out she was to sell her time to a man in exchange for a modeling gig. She thought it would just be dinner, but it was night, and she spent it. She did get a small modeling gig where she got to take photos for a small brand, but that was it. A few more men used her while she hoped for a gig in return, but she'd be told that they didn't select her. She then found out that the guy investing in her was actually selling her. He was profiting off of her. She thought it unwise to confront him because she was afraid he'd have her killed, so she told him that she didn't want to pursue modeling anymore and was okay with minimum wage jobs. Thankfully, he let her go without an issue. She then tried to wait tables at bars, and it was pretty tough for her. That's what hard-earned cash is, Emily. But anyway, she also said that Karen would humiliate her for choosing to do those small jobs. Karen would tell her women are the beauty of this world and should only be there to shine and smile like a showpiece. They need to be taken good care of, and so on. So Emily started going out with men only for dinner, but she charged for it. She said there were many loners out there who just wanted conversation. But that too ended up with stalkers and obsessive men who thought they were owed more than what they'd paid for. She decided that talking to men, making them feel connected to her, was more problematic than sleeping with them, so she started escorting. It worked fine until a friend told her about OnlyFans. She tried to get it going, but she wasn't really good at handling a camera and editing things. She wasn't social enough, and it required a lot of work, so that didn't work out either. Then she met her boyfriend, who was an ex-coworker. He worked as a barista, and they met again. She liked him a lot, but he was too clingy. He was a little possessive, too, and didn't trust her much. Granted, he had every reason to doubt her because she was, in fact, still on OnlyFans and an escort without his knowledge. She stopped escorting completely, and her boyfriend started taking care of her with the little money he made, and she was fine with it. Karen wasn't, though. But then she got pregnant, and her boyfriend found out everything. She said she has a few men on the list who could be potential fathers. They all chip in with money to support the kid and her. One of them had even proposed to her, but she knows all of them are doing it because they think they're the only one there is, which is ridiculous since they know she's an escort, but she doesn't outrightly tell them that. Each one pays her bills and would probably help with the kid. She said she decided to tell me all this because she couldn't tell Dad, and Dad thinks she's only been modeling here and there, making little money, and that she had one guy in her life who left her when he should have stayed. Karen knows most of it and suggests Emily marry the guy who proposed and let him think he's the father. But Emily doesn't know what to tell Dad. She also doesn't want to marry the guy because he's weird and old, and she doesn't want to let anyone believe a lie. I asked her what she wanted me to help with, and she said that some financial input would be fine, and she wants me to make up with Dad. She said that I should agree to what Dad's asking, and then move out for some time, then I could come back when matters aren't as heated. How is that a solution? I respectfully declined her offer and told her I could only contribute some cash, but I wasn't okay with moving out of my own house. She then told me I was selfish for thinking like that she exposed her whole life to me, and I didn't have the least bit of decency to help her out. She said Dad was right about me, and I deserved to be sent to an orphanage and not taken in when I needed a place to live. She got up and stomped away. I think my response wasn't too extreme, but is it selfish? Really, what do you think of her side of the story? Does it justify her demands? Should I trust her? I feel like she was telling the truth, but does it mean I should do what she's asking for? Let me know, y'all. Update this thing's picking at my brain at this point. Another week has passed and a few things happened, so I thought I'd hit the keys and update y'all on it. Thanks for the support on my previous update, you guys. It's such a relief to have people support my thoughts for once. Anyway, so after I met Emily, I got a call from Dad. He wanted to meet me at the bar and settle a few things. Curious, I agreed and went to meet him. We sat at the counter, and he said that he knew how much I was earning. I asked him why it mattered, and he said he knew I could afford to buy another house in a few years. I shrugged and told him I already have a house, and this discussion should seriously be put to an end. He insisted that I didn't have a family yet, and it's harder for women to raise a child alone. That kid needs a safe space he can call home. So I reminded Dad that Emily has been living with them long enough, and nothing seemed to be a problem. A little baby won't hurt. I also asked him what she would do living alone in a whole house when she's pregnant. I said she needed to be surrounded by people so that she can be taken care of. That's when Dad shocked me once again. He said he and Karen would move in with Emily in my house. I couldn't believe my ears. Before I could react to that, the bartender let out a sarcastic chuckle. Dad took offense and asked him what was so funny. To him, Emily, he replied. He said she uses everyone and then throws them away. My dad asked him if he knew who he was talking about, and he nodded, saying he was her boyfriend. My eyes widened, so this was the guy. Dad balled his fists and spoke sternly to the guy, asking him why he thought it was okay to start a family he couldn't support. The guy held his hands up and told Dad that he wasn't responsible for the family in question and that he had no interest in raising a child that was not his own. Dad dared him to explain why he thought that. He smiled and told us that he'd had a vasectomy done 5 years ago because he didn't want any kids, but Emily still got pregnant. Also, he found her driving off with different men after lying to him about where she'd been going. Then he found out she had an OnlyFans account. He said he didn't want to believe any of it. But when Emily finally told him they were having a baby, that was the last straw for him. He couldn't have a kid, so it confirmed everything. He told Emily that she'd been cheating on him all along and he knew, and she spilled the beans. All I could do was watch Dad's face shift from anger to shock to disappointment while my ears were pinned to the guy's voice. He shrugged and told us he owed Emily nothing, rather. She owed him money, time, sincerity, and at the very least, love. He said he didn't know if Dad knew any of this, but he was sure no dad would be proud of a kid like that. Dad tightened his lips, got off the stool without a word, and walked away. Later that evening, he texted me, telling me he had to go pick Karen up from her yoga class. I don't know what went on after that, but I'm sure it was something because the very next day, I found Emily at my door crying. She told me I ruined everything. I pulled her inside to avoid a scene and calmed her down. I told her that I didn't tell Dad anything. It was her boyfriend who happened to be the bartender where Dad and I had gone. She then told me Dad told her to quit everything and stay at home. He said he was disgusted with her and never thought she'd resort to such practices. He told her to mend her ways and find a good man. He also pointed out that her chances to find good men were pretty slim now. I listened to her and hugged her. She said she was sorry for thinking it was me because Dad had just come home from meeting me when he confronted her. I forgave her, and then she went back home. While she was ranting and telling me about how pathetic she felt, she mentioned that Karen was pretty quiet when Dad was talking about good women and their loyalty, like she could say anything. Emily said one of the things she can't speak about. I asked her what she meant by that, and she said that Karen couldn't have an opinion since she is. I could only frown in confusion before Emily continued on with her crying as she narrated what else happened. Yoga, huh? Stuck with me? What do y'all think really happened? Is Emily going to be Dad's pride still? No one's contacted me since then. I'm going to see and let y'all know. I know y'all probably didn't expect me to get back to you so soon, but I couldn't help it. Update just 12 days after my last upload, and I'm here for the ones asking. Emily's ex's name is irrelevant, but we can call him Bob. Here's the new bit. So the day before yesterday, I went to meet Dad. I told him I decided on a few things. I said that I'd wanted to help raise Emily's kid, and I was ready to lend a room to her. I would be okay to pay for the diapers and stuff, but she needs to get a job as soon as she can. Dad told me that then there'd be no one with the baby, so I suggested she try freelancing or working from home. Dad wasn't his usual rude self this time. He took a pause and then sighed. He sat down on the couch and told me he thought I'd hated him. He was right, but I asked him why he thought that. He said it was because Mom hated him too. I quickly told him she never told me that she always said Dad loved me and cared about me. I told him that the only reason I was disappointed at all was how wrong my perception of Dad was. Mom told me all that, and then what I felt from Dad was total neglect and lack of care. He rubbed his eyes and told me he hated himself for a lot of things. He said he liked Mom, but they hadn't known one another long enough to decide if they were actually each other's type. He sighed and said that he got her pregnant and that's why he had to marry her. She was a good wife to him, but he never felt the spark between them. And then he met Karen. When he said that, I could feel my insides tingling. I couldn't move. I didn't know any of this. Dad told me that Karen sparked a flame in him he never knew he had. He was so happy with her, and before he knew it, he caught feelings. Before he could navigate his way through rights and wrongs, he got Karen pregnant too. Then he told Karen it was wrong, but it was too late she was pregnant. He told her to wait because he wanted to tell Mom first, but Karen felt insecure and came to our house. She told Mom everything. Mom confronted Dad, and he accepted it. It was a very ugly episode because Mom was extremely hurt, but even then she was polite and asked Dad for a divorce. My parents divorced because Dad had an affair with my stepmom and got her pregnant. I don't know how worse this man could get. Dad took a pause and looked over at me. He said that he'd spent a nice year with Karen when Mom died and he had to bring me home. Karen hated everything about it. She was again insecure that Dad might prioritize me over their baby somehow because of guilt or whatever, so he sent me away to boarding school 3 years later. And then I never had to stay home long enough to cause Karen any discomfort. "Love makes you do stupid things," he said, and I wanted to punch this man in the face, but I controlled it. I turned around to see Karen standing in the doorway, water bottle in hand. She said she was just leaving for yoga class and put her bottle on the table, then went into the kitchen. I blinked, and before I could think straight, she was back and went through the door. I was numb, so I followed her out. I picked up her water bottle to return it to her. When I got out, she'd already gotten in her car and was driving off. I needed a drive to clear my mind, so I quietly sat in my car and drove, following her. She parked outside a yoga club and got out. She looked around herself and then started walking into an alley. She again looked around herself and got into another car. She hugged and kissed the driver, and they drove off. I could hardly blink. I clenched my jaw, parked my car, got out, and went inside the yoga club. I asked them about Karen checking in, and they denied giving me personal info. I said I was worried about her and insisted I be told if she was there. They told me they had no client with that name. I got back to my car and waited. I don't know what came over me, but when that other car rolled in, I started making a video. A man got out, opened her door for her, hugged her, kissed her, then slapped her butt as she joyously made her way to the parking lot. So much for yoga, Karen. Before she could get to the parking lot, I left. So my dad cheated on my mom, and now he's getting cheated on. Karma. Dad has called me a few times, but I didn't pick up. Going to see what happens because all I can think of is how ironic this whole situation is. Want to do now is go and ask Karen about it all. Should I update? Hey, y'all, this is probably going to be the last update, I think, and I know it's a week late and y'all expected it to be sooner, but so much happened this week. First, I actually managed to man up and go and confront Karen. I went when Dad wasn't home and was asleep. I asked her if she had a yoga class that day. She said she had it every day, even on Sundays. She was in the kitchen cooking pasta. I asked her who her yoga instructor was, and she took a random name. I asked her if that was a woman. She said no and laughed. "Why would I take a man?" she said. I told her it was funny that she had a female one when the club she went to didn't have any female instructors. She told me I was mistaken, but her voice was caught off guard and her hands weren't stirring the pasta sauce anymore. I told her I joined the club yesterday, and that's what they told me. She asked me how I knew where her club was. I told her I followed her the last time I'd visited. She dropped a spoon. I picked it up and she turned around. "What are you getting at?" she asked me. So I told her what I saw. She denied it as expected. I said I saw it with my own eyes. She shrugged and told me Dad would never believe me. I pulled out my phone, played the video, and told her he'd believe his own eyes at least. She stood in shock and was speechless for a minute. Then her expressions calmed down and she continued to cook pasta. She said it didn't matter anymore. She was already planning for a divorce anyway. My eyes widened. This woman was despicable. Granted, my dad deserved all of it, but man, she's a snake. She told me that the guy she goes to meet at the club is her lover of 5 years now. They rekindled their romance when it was safe to. She said they'd fallen in love long ago, but at that time he was married to another woman whose father had hired him in his company. A lot was at stake, but Karen and her lover decided that he'd choose to keep his marriage and settle his finances. Then he'd divorce his wife and get with Karen. But Karen got pregnant, so she was desperate to pin a guy down for support, as women should. That's how she decided to keep Dad. They were seeing each other off and on. But then Karen met her lover and got pregnant. So she chose Dad and told him he had to do something about it. She said he got cold feet, so she had to take it into her own hands, and that's when she spoke to Mom. Now her lover is a widower and owns a company. She's good to go. She said women need to do what they can and turned around with a smile, but her smile froze as she looked over my shoulder. Her smile was gone in the next moment. I turned around to find Dad in the doorway, fists balled and eyes red. He was shaking. Well, then Dad woke Emily up and brought her to the kitchen. He asked her who her father was. She looked over at Karen and shook her head. She told him she didn't care about blood because she always knew him to be her dad. He ran his fingers through his hair and paced the floor. Over the next 2 days, Karen and Emily were told to leave his house. The divorce is in process. Karen and Emily are staying at a shelter. Dad has asked me to find him a therapist, and he's apologized a lot since. I forgive him every time. As for Karen, her lover didn't take her in. He denies having any contact with her. I have the proof, and Karen has begged me for it. She's even asked me to think of Emily in her pregnancy. What can I say? Karen, your kid, your problem. What should I do? Delete the video or hand it over? I'll update in the comments sometime later. Thanks for being with me. Your suggestions and support mean a lot.